As women of faith, how do we operate within God's purpose? How do we withstand and overcome the demands and the challenges of life so that we live a life that's pleasing to God? As Black women, it seems we carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. According to the Black Woman's Health Imperative, founded in 1990 in Washington, D.C., the burden of being a Black woman takes its toll on our health and well-being. As mothers, daughters, and sisters, Black women endure the traumas of poor maternal health care, high rates of diseases, and the stress of living in a society that undervalues and under-recognizes the richness that we bring. Yet we get up each morning and we care for our families. We go to jobs where we dodge microaggression and endure societal systems and structures that promote inequality and discrimination. Hello, I'm Lisa Dangerfield, First Lady of Heritage Fellowship Church. Each year we celebrate Women's Week with activities that seek to educate, edify, and empower women. This year, the theme for Women's Week is Empowered by Love, and our scripture reference is 1 Peter 4:8. As part of our effort to deal with some of the challenges that we face as Black women, we reached out to 4 medical and health professionals for information and direction.
I knew that I wanted to get a PhD or become a doctor, but I knew that I wanted to do it under the conditions that it was going to be something that was for us and by us. And so I didn't want to occupy space in academia and like the ivory tower if I wasn't going to do something to move the needle for Black women.
And I ultimately decided to do OBGYN because it's one of those fields that encompasses a lot in the sense of women's health. So because it embraced so much, it gave continuity, it gave a continuum of a woman's life, actually, from delivering babies to, menopause and beyond. It was a really neat specialty that I think there's really no other specialty that's just like that.
I grew up being interested in science and health. I grew up as an athlete doing gymnastics. And so I always, I think, in real time was able to experience the benefits of being physically fit and being physically active. So I went to college under the impression that I would enter medical school. I started volunteering in a lab on campus that did research on prediabetes. And I fairly quickly became interested in doing research as a career rather than working clinically.
I think public health found me. I was wondering how to impact and help people. So I always thought that you had to be a physician in order to do that. And when I found out I could put on a suit, hire physicians, and then look at a larger patient population and just the patients coming into a private practice, I said, well, sign me up. That's kind of cool.
So something that my research has found so far in the focus groups, particularly when I've touched on my 45-year and older age demographic, there's a lot of women that had some sort of medical event or medical crisis where they're like, ooh, I need to sit myself down real quick. Like somebody that's almost had a heart failure because she kept pushing everything to the side to take care of everyone else around her. Being shut in because of COVID, now I'm really going to have to take account into my mental health and well-being, something that I put aside. Whereas the younger generation, so my Gen Z and millennials, were like, nope, because we are on TikTok and we're seeing like, oh, I want to be a soft life. And of course, there are different superficial definitions of what it means to be soft or what that is, a soft life. But what the clear determination for me is, this is the antithesis or the opposite of what it means to be a superwoman, what it means to be a strong Black woman. And we are trying to not let those significant health issues or mental health issues persist before we put down our cape. Or we've seen our moms, our grandmothers, great-grandmothers, aunts, more mothers go through this and we're like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be run down and ragged. It's just not going to happen.
We have to think about our lives in a sense of like trying to live our best life and have as much longevity as we can. And so when you get to be about 40 years old and you realize like the body starts doing some funny changes and, you can't focus, your periods are irregular, You may not find yourself to be as attractive as you were when you were younger because you're starting to gain weight and all of that kind of stuff, all of the real kind of superficial stuff. But at the end of the day, our job, as even in gynecology, because we're somewhat sort of looked upon as primary care to a certain degree. We're not primary care providers, but we kind of function in that role for our younger patients because most of the younger patients are healthy and well. But when you get to be in your 40s and then you enter in your 50s and really the menopause, you start to see all of these things that change. And we have to learn to embrace actually the process of aging. And embracing aging, though, comes along with like living our best life. And what does that mean? It means taking care of ourselves. So it means like, heart health, which is very important because heart disease affects women greater proportion than men at younger ages. And so heart health, meaning eating healthy, exercising, keeping that cholesterol down. When we start having hormonal changes, that estrogen that changes in our body does a lot actually to our body in the sense of increasing cholesterol, the hot flashes and things that cause us not to sleep well. And sleep, it becomes our vitamin of life. It is so important to get sleep. It's difficult sometimes to do that during that transition period of time because you're having having night sweats and hot flashes and you're irritable and all of that kind of stuff that plays a role. Well, when that's happening, also your cortisol levels, which is your stress hormone, which is, increasing, which is not a healthy thing as well, that can also affect your heart and other parts of your bodies as well. So it's really, really important that not looking at aging as if it's a horrible thing. If we all live long enough, I mean, we need to embrace it, and embracing it meaning to live the best life that we can. And there are many things that we can control. The genetics we cannot control, but the external, the environmental, we can control.
So in 2008, we had our first set of federal guidelines. And there was something very specific that they said. They said in order to meet the guidelines, you had to be active in 10-minute bouts.
All right, so I'm going to break something down for you all. And there's something called allostatic load, which is the idea of prolonged exposure to stress on a person's body actually changes the molecular age. So there's a framework called the weathering framework. I do not remember the person who created it, but her hypothesis was that because Black women have more prolonged stress on their body as compared to other races and gender in society, they're going to have more allostatic load, so prolonged exposure to stress. And so we can see that manifest in a variety of different ways. There has not been direct research related to, like Black women, allostatic load, but there's a lot of inferences in between the lines. There are a lot of conclusions that can be drawn. So one of them is that if we have dysregulation within our cells at a molecular structure because of systematic and structural racism in society, that might cause an increase for risk associated with cancers. That also might cause a risk associated with different heart diseases and things like that. And so there's been, I think, a lot of different op-eds recently about how stress is killing Black women because it also causes issues with autoimmune disorders. That also can be attributed to allostatic load. And because the hormones become very dysregulated, because different systems become very dysregulated, that can cause dysfunction at a molecular level. And we see that dysfunction take place in cancers and chronic diseases and things like that.
What we found rather than that data was that when the women came into access care, it was almost too late for whatever they were asking for. So it was either late stage cancer, having issues with fibroids, or was late stage mental health things that we were looking at. Also heart attack, strokes, those kind of things. We would meet some of these patients in the hospital, and then they would transfer from charity care back to our facility as a free and charitable clinic. So that's when we saw a lot of the Black patients actually.
One thing that is so important, regardless of the situation that you're seeking out healthcare, is you have to be your own advocate. And if you know someone who happens to be a good friend or a family member who also happens to be knowledgeable in medicine, you need to take advantage of your village that can also help advocate for you. And it's really sad, right? But sometimes, you get more of the attention, right? If Dr. So-and-so calls on behalf of, your loved one or whatever.
You have to say to yourself that I'm enough, right? I'm valuable enough, I'm loved enough, and I should be treated a certain way when I come into the system. And I'm not going to have any other thing take place. And I think that's something you have to repeat to yourself, women as men as well, that listen, I may have this diagnosis, but this diagnosis doesn't have me.
The strength of Black women has been equally praised and vilified. Why do we have such a heavy burden? And how do we get the health community to see us?
In 2020, when we saw the racial reckonings happening and different events and people sitting with themselves and being like, oh, wow, there are structures of racism, I was really interested in that impact on Black women's health. And so I gave a talk called Sis Throw Your Cape Away, where I drew on points from the father of gynecology, J. Marion Sims, and how he had very skewed and incorrect ideology when it came to Black women's bodies. He was operating unconsensually on enslaved women. So unconsensually did not get permission because the Black women were property. So they didn't have to ask yes or no. It's just like, you're going to do this. So he operated on them on a gynecological procedure with no anesthesia, and decided that that was because Black women have a higher pain tolerance, thicker skin, things like that. Then he went over to Europe and anesthetized the European women. And so that right there during the enslaved period really set the precedent for mismanaged care and inappropriate practices for Black women, which we see now has continued to persist for centuries and decades.
So we are, as a community of healthcare providers across the country, are trying to make impact, to make implicit bias be well known. I mean, known and taught in the classroom to the medical students. And so we're not, where the didactics is not just teaching about the sciences, but it's teaching about the social behavior and things just like that, the microaggressions, the implicit biases, all of that kind of stuff, because it has really caused inequities in healthcare, particularly for women of color. Speaking for my profession, but for people of color or underrepresented, yeah, and and we all have implicit biases, even if, but what's most important is making each and every one of us be aware of our biases, and the fact that if we are aware of our biases, we're more conscious in the way which we interact with actually our patients. So, and you brought up one example, which is, Black people have thick skin, so they can bear pain different than somebody that is of non-Black, of a non-Black race. And that's been something for a long time. And something as simple as that, how that can get entwined in one's head, and that you look at one person and another person who had the same operation or the same procedure, and yet you're treating one very different than another because of some cultural, racial biases that actually exist. So we are trying to implement it in the curriculum starting in medical school. And as far as attending doctors, we are also trying to incorporate lectures, simulated drills, just to become more aware that it is a problem, and we have to try to correct the inequities of healthcare, and starting very in the beginning of our own subconscious biases that we actually have.
But I think with cultural competency, I think is going to come us as a people, entire community, the community that is well and the community that is not well, to start again to share information about what they see. When you go to a provider, and if you're African American, they ask you, well, do you have diabetes? Have you had a heart attack or a stroke? Have you had any of these things? And you tell people no, they say, huh. So I mean, sometimes it's how professionals are trained. It's also about what they've experienced as well in their own healthcare setting. So if they've seen a lot of patients with these type of symptoms, heart attack, stroke, diabetes, they're going to ask because you look similar to the last patient they saw. So I know we can't take that personally. We just have to start sharing accurate health information The more accurate the health information is, the better we can look to increase cultural competency among providers.
But I sense comfort in many of my patients who are of color, who come to see me. They see me, yes, as a woman of color, and I think they find comfort actually in me, not only because I'm a woman of color, but for a lot of attributes. I'm someone who listens and listens very attentively and really embraces the whole person. And something at Georgetown, which is a motto of Georgetown, is something called cura personal, and it's caring for the whole person, not just part of the person, but it's caring for the whole person. And so I think that my patients sort of they if they can wait for me, because I do run behind all of that, because I take time actually with my patients, but I'm an old school doctor because that's how we taught, that's how we learn. We learn to listen to our patient. And the problem today with the way medicine is in the sense of corporate, 15 minutes. You're here for this problem. If you got another problem, you got to make another appointment, right? Unfortunately, it's just the way it is. And it's very hard. It's easier, I think, for the generation that's coming up because it's the only way that they know. But for us old school doctors, that's not why we went into medicine. And that's not the kind of doctor that we really want to be. And so I think because of that, because I'm a very caring doctor, I'm a very knowledgeable doctor, and yes, I happen to be of color. I think my patients of color certainly embrace that.
So what does the future hold? What can we expect from those who are focused on improving the health of our community?
We need to start looking at policy development. So that's why I liked public health too, because it wasn't just about curing the patient or treating the patient. We're seeing patient populations of being able to deliver a medical diagnosis to them and start to track it. On the other hand, what I saw is that I can actually write standard operating procedures that change the way we triage patients. That's powerful. And so I think if we have more people in our community of African American descent that are doing that for our community, where they're saying, you know what, when we come in, we'll ask what medication somebody's currently taking, rather than asking them, do you have diabetes or have you had a heart attack or stroke, and these kind of things. Because we can start to deduce because of the medication someone's taking and how many patients are taking that, how frequently we're seeing that and tracking that data is captured in another way, rather than it being such a personal question that's being asked. So that way, when people hear, oh, well, I'm taking magnesium, I take a zinc, I take a multivitamin, a women's multivitamin, and that's all I take. And I say, oh, okay. So now they know you don't take diabetes medication, you're not taking high blood pressure medication, you're not taking a statin, you're not taking anything else, no other viral issues you have. So that's it. That's all they can ask you, rather than having to go through a list that's been written by a certain medical association because that's what they want to see. Sure. We can now go to that medical association and say, we've created a standard operating procedure that changes the way we speak to patients, so that then we can see that cultural competency go up, one, and then two, the cultural sensitivity that comes with that go up. So that's where I see some hope. It's in the power of the pen. The pen's going to help us to be able to do that. And I think policy development is going to be key for us to see any strides being made with cultural competency, with better access to care, and better medical treatment for our community.
We have to do a better job in basically getting monies to educate the women population, particularly women of color or underrepresented, where these certain negative sort of outcomes impact that population. And as we know, it is a big deal among women of color, for sure. And we're talking about the high blood pressure, we're talking about the preeclampsia, which are diseases related to hypertension of pregnancy, the lack of prenatal care, access to prenatal care, because maybe they're uninsured. We need to have more free clinics around that patients feel that they can go to clinics and get prenatal care. I mean, prenatal care should be a given. Because that prenatal care impacts our future population, right? Of our babies that become our future population. And so there is no reason in a developed country like the United States that we have outcomes the way we do of Black women who end up having complications related to their babies as well as to themselves. And then also the fact that they're not all getting prenatal care. I mean, that's not the only reason, because we know many people who have gotten prenatal care that still have bad outcomes. And so, and access also to the specialists. When you have things that come up in your pregnancy and you need more detailed prenatal care, more surveillance and that kind of stuff, there should be access to that.
The Biden administration specifically has done a lot for Black maternal health. However, a lot of people, and I myself included, I was really ignorant to the fact that health policies, the NIH, Health and Human Services, CDC, their funding is going to be directly related to who's in office and who gets to allocate that funding. Therefore, if we do not have an administration, we do not have a president that values science, that values research, that values Black women's health or women's health in general, then we're not going to have the appropriate funding to continue that research and change policy. Because without data, you're not going to have policy changes and shifts. And also, it wasn't until the 90s when it was a requirement for the NIH to start including minoritized individuals in research, which also includes women. And so the reason why now there's a lot of outrage, we're like, well, why didn't we know this before about X, Y, and Z? Or why is it now we're just now finding out about, the lead in tampons or different issues that happen in pregnancy with the brain, things like that? Well, women being included in research is less than 40 years old. And also, Black women specifically, we only occupy 3% of individuals getting a PhD, which is a research degree. And then within that, only 1% of Black women occupy a STEM research degree. And so science can only be as inclusive and as anti-racist as the scientists leading the charge, as the scientists fighting for funding, as the scientists being in the community and being like, wow, I'm curious about this. I'm curious about why this is happening. But if they're not applying, they're also not nurtured to apply. They don't see that representation, then that needle doesn't move.
Education-wise, it does seem like more people are more cognizant of their health. It's becoming a bit more mainstream. But in terms of actually maybe declines in those diseases, we don't necessarily see that yet. But that's the interesting thing, is that, I think we're starting to get past step one, which is good. Step one is always to educate people. The first thing that you need to know is to know. I think, like I said at the beginning, we're learning more and more, and our public is getting educated more and more. So I think that's promising. I just read a recent study regarding the disparities between white and non-white minorities and physical activity. And while there is a gap that we see, that gap is getting smaller and smaller. And I think that just shows that that education is spreading, and some of the equity initiatives are likely working regarding public health. And so I think what the most important thing now is, as researchers, we're just trying to figure out how we can get someone to change their behavior and for that to really stick.
I think it's each one teach one. I think it's the same things that we had in our communities, over 100 years ago. We would see that someone needed some care. They would talk about their experiences and share that with others. You need to go see Dr. Green, or you need to go see Dr. Smith, or make sure if you have a problem with your teeth, go talk to Mr. Williams over here. So it's more of, I think, the opportunity to share the experience and share who we know in our community to get the help that we need first. I think it's marketing on who actually are the providers. The second thing is to eliminate the fear of sharing your medical story. I think that's a big thing. I would say that's the next thing to do. That once you know who Dr. Williams is, or Dr. Green or Dr. Smith are, you know what their specialties are, you know whether you have insurance or not, you know whether you have transportation or not to get to those doctors. Then it's saying, okay, I went to the doctors, I had this experience. the doctor told me these 3 things, right? So that's what women should be telling women. Black men should be telling Black men. Anyone seeking care should be telling their story about what happened to them, because you never know who's listening. You never know who's not sharing their story or who's not saying something about what they're struggling with currently. And I think if we can market in those 2 ways, market good providers that are in our community, and we can market the opportunity to say, I will share my testimony with you about what I've been through, when we know that someone else has a condition. So I think that's what we need to do. And that could be education. I think it's more just sharing and spreading the word throughout the community. And I think that will help us to better track what we call prevalence rates in public health. How often something's happening. If we know more and more people are reporting this, we now know that in the community, in one section, we have this issue, and now we can start addressing some of the environmental factors that come with that. And then also, whether or not we can have access to care to be successful, meaning they can find the providers they need and they can get the care that they need.
I stand on the back of Bell Hooks, who said that we need to have conversations and come together with love and empathy to understand one another. I think about Audre Lorde and her essays about the importance of my vision being stronger than my fear. And when I have that vision, I don't care about my fear. I paraphrase, but that's the gist of that message. And so with that in mind, I think that my vision is so strong for what could potentially happen with this research, even if it's just, if there's someone 10 years younger than me, I randomly run into them or talk to their mom, they're like, I want to do that. Then I feel like that's enough. I don't know if society fully is out of space, because society wasn't out of space to elect just a white woman president. I hope things turn out differently this November, but I know Black women are out of space to make sure that Black women are okay. And that's more important to me than society as a whole. I want to bring more awareness. I want to have conversations like this. My ultimate goal and aspiration is I would love to be on TV, being a health commentator, a science commentator, being able to break down those hard science topics in a way that's digestible for the average person to understand. Because at the end of the day, if you don't understand something, there's a lot of fear that can go on, and that should not be the case. I also think about my pop, who was in Eastern North Carolina during COVID-19, and he said he didn't want to do anything the white man said to do. And I said, can you listen to this white man one more time for me and get your vaccine? But if we keep seeing the same people projecting the same message over and over again on these mainstream platforms, you're missing a ton of people. I also hope that this inspires other scientists, particularly ones that look like me, to say like, oh, I can do research just for Black women. I can center them in a way that's empowering and allows them to use their voices in a society where so many people have spoken for us, against us, or not allowed us to speak at all and take control of that narrative. Because I just hope that I continue to go in the direction that God wants me to go in. I hope that I think about my great grandmother that I knew for a short period of time, my Nana, and how her life could have been a little different if she didn't have to be Superwoman. I think about my grandmother, my late grandmother, and how she was Superwoman. I think about how that has impacted my mother, and I also think about how I want it to stop with me. If I have a daughter one day, I don't want her to have to wear the invisible cape or think that she has to bear so much. And I get it, society is one way, but if I can stop that when it comes in my house, or create that safe space, or let her know, like, mommy gets help. She goes to therapy. She gets someone to clean the house. She puts things down. She says no. Then that will be great too.
Alleviating these challenges and transforming our future requires action between us, among us, and for us. To be a warrior for Christ, we must manifest love and have the stamina and capacity to serve. I am confident we will face and overcome these challenges together because we are empowered by love. Thank you for watching.